The year was 2019, and Isabella, just 16, was thrust into an experience that would mark her life forever. Amidst school holidays, her father, David, was traveling for work in Alabama, and to prevent his daughter from being alone in a hotel, he decided to send her to his sister Elizabeth's house on the outskirts of the Appalachian Mountains. Isabella, with no great expectations, accepted. Her destination was an isolated village with few houses, dimly lit streets, and an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow any trace of civilization. The reception was strange. Liam and Chloe, Isabella's cousins, were close to her in age, but they quickly made it clear that this place was not like others. They told stories of disappearances, of mysterious voices coming from the forest, and of presences that roamed the houses at night. Isabella, urban and skeptical, thought it was all an exaggeration. She didn't know that, soon, her incredulity would be put to the test. On the first night, Isabella slept on the floor of Chloe's room. The travel fatigue wasn't enough to make her relax. There was something in the air, a feeling of being watched, that at any moment something could emerge from the shadows. The room had a large window, nailed shut and covered by a brown sheet, according to Liam, so that nothing could see or enter. Isabella found it strange, but didn't question it. The early morning brought the first sign that something was wrong. Isabella woke up to a scratching sound coming from the window. She thought it was a dream, but seconds later another scratch came, accompanied by a guttural, low, disturbing icks. Startled, she woke Chloe, who, with chilling calm, said that was normal and that she just needed to ignore it for it to stop. Isabella was indignant at her cousin's nonchalance, but remembering the stories she had heard, she began to feel that perhaps she wasn't exaggerating. The next day, around 5 in the afternoon, Elizabeth explained the reason for the heavy atmosphere. The house had been bought for a very low price, and she had no choice. The neighbors warned. The surrounding forest was home to beings, some good, some bad, that came out at night looking for food. Cases of unexplained disappearances, voices of loved ones calling from the woods, inexplicable noises. Isabella listened to everything with a mix of disbelief and growing fear. On the second night, Isabella was awakened by something even more disturbing, a baby crying coming from the window. The sound was so real and distressing that she froze. Chloe also woke up and for the first time admitted it was the first time they had used a baby's cry. Terror settled in the room. Both remained motionless, listening to the lament until, finally, silence returned. Isabella couldn't sleep for the rest of the night, feeling vulnerable and powerless before the inexplicable. The next day dragged on. Isabella avoided looking at the window, and Chloe seemed quieter than ever. The atmosphere in the house was tense, as if everyone was waiting for something worse. The third night was the worst of all. Close to 2 in the morning, Isabella still hadn't been able to sleep. The silence was absolute until a loud bang on the window glass made her jump out of bed. Chloe woke up startled, asking what was happening. Before they could calm down, another bang came from downstairs, from the living room. Liam appeared at the bedroom door, pale, asking if they were making the noise. When they realized it was coming from the living room, they rushed to call Elizabeth. All together, they went down to the living room. One of the windows had its curtain open, and there, outside, a figure stood out in the darkness. Its hand was raised, ready to bang on the glass again. It was impossible to distinguish if it was a man or a woman, old or young. It was a dark blur with wide, staring eyes and a sinister, frozen smile on its face. Elizabeth, in despair, ran to the kitchen and grabbed a knife, trying to intimidate the creature, but it didn't move. It only moved its mouth, as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. Time seemed to have stopped. The figure, motionless, stared at the four with an empty, menacing gaze. Seconds later, it began to slowly lower itself, disappearing from view. The terror was absolute. Liam ran to the window, trying to see where the creature had gone, but there was nothing there anymore. He closed the curtain and went back to the others, all in a state of shock. Elizabeth, trembling, decided that they would no longer stay in that house. The situation had crossed every limit. Until then, the noises were bearable, but that apparition was something no one was prepared to face. The next morning, the family began packing to leave. Isabella couldn't get the sinister smile of the figure in the window out of her head. Chloe and Liam, despite being used to the noises, were also shaken. Elizabeth, always strong, admitted that she had never experienced anything so terrifying. It was as if the house had been marked, as if something there had decided it was time to show itself. Isabella, once skeptical, now felt a deep fear of everything around her. Every shadow, every sound seemed to hide something menacing. The village, once just strange, was now clearly hostile. The feeling of isolation was suffocating, and the desire to leave only grew. While preparing to move, neighbors came to ask the reason for the sudden departure. Elizabeth broadly explained what had happened. Some neighbors just shook their heads, as if they had already expected it. Others said that, from time to time, the forest chose a house to haunt. Isabella realized that, for those who lived there, the supernatural was part of everyday life, something to learn to live with or to flee from. The family left the house that same afternoon. Isabella took one last look at the bedroom window, where it all began. She felt a shiver run down her spine, as if she was being watched. She knew she would never forget that feeling. The following days were a relief, but also filled with unease. Isabella returned home with her father, but the memories of her visit to the Appalachians never left her. At night, she had trouble sleeping, fearing to hear scratches or cries coming from the window. The fear was irrational, but real. Chloe and Liam also changed, becoming more reserved, less willing to talk about what happened. Elizabeth, now in another city, avoided any conversation about the old house. Isabella tried to research the village, but found little information. It seemed the place wanted to be forgotten, erased from the memory of those who passed through. Time passed, but the trauma remained. Isabella, now older, still feels a chill in her stomach remembering that night. The figure's smile in the window, the oppressive silence of the forest, the paralyzing fear, all of it was etched in her mind. She learned to respect the unknown and never to doubt the warnings of the elders. The story became a warning for friends and family. There are places where the inexplicable dwells, where fear is more real than anything you can see or touch. Isabella knows she'll never be the same after that visit. If you ever find yourself on the outskirts of the Appalachian Mountains, remember, danger may be outside your window or even whispering in the dark. What Isabella experienced is a reminder that there are forces we don't understand, and that fear, however irrational it may seem, is sometimes the only shield between us and the unknown. In 1980, Leonard, a staunch skeptic from Lexington, Kentucky, set out for the Great Smoky Mountains with his friends Marek, Luca, and Dimitri. The group was looking for just another camping and hunting adventure, giving no credit to legends or supernatural stories. The first night was marked by an almost boring tranquility, a lit bonfire, casual conversation, and an isolated clearing where the silence was so dense that not even animals dared to interrupt it. The wind cut through the trees, but Leonard felt something strange in the air, an unsettling absence of natural sounds. Tired, everyone settled in. However, in the early morning, Leonard awoke with an unease he couldn't explain. The silence seemed to have become absolute, suffocating, as if the whole world had stopped. He looked at his friends, all sleeping deeply, and decided to go for a walk around the edge of the campsite. The cold night cut through his skin, and the solitude weighed more than ever. As he walked, he heard a low sound, like something heavy dragging through the vegetation. It wasn't an animal, it wasn't the wind, it was deliberate, slow, menacing. Leonard stood still, trying to identify the source, but the sound disappeared as quickly as it arose. He returned to the tent, but the discomfort did not leave him. He knew something was wrong, even without proof. The next day, nothing seemed out of the ordinary for Marek, Luka, and Dmitri. The group occupied themselves with hunting, trying to ignore any sense of strangeness. Leonard, however, felt watched, as if the forest had eyes. The day passed slowly, and night arrived with a silent tension. Sitting around the campfire, everyone tried to relax, but the atmosphere was different. Around 11 p.m., Marek commented that he had heard something strange. Dmitri laughed, saying they were just forest sounds. But then a heavy, dragging sound erupted, coming from all directions at once. It wasn't an animal, it wasn't the wind. It was as if something was surrounding the campsite. Fear, until then contained, took hold of the group. Marek stood up, nervous, saying that it wasn't normal. Leonard, who had always scoffed at others' fear, felt the same dread. They decided to investigate, thinking it might be an animal. But the sound seemed to play with them, changing direction, getting closer, and at the same time, impossible to locate. Luka, further ahead, suddenly stopped and shouted. He saw something. Leonard ran to him, but couldn't see anything. Luka was pale, trembling, and ran back to the tent without saying a word. The silence returned, but it was a heavy silence, charged with threat. No one could sleep that night. The fear was palpable, and every shadow seemed to hide something. When the sun finally rose, it was as if the forest was darker, the shadows denser. Marek, Luka, and Dmitri were quiet, avoiding any mention of what had happened. Leonard knew that everyone had been marked by that night, even if no one wanted to admit it. The decision to leave was silent, almost automatic. They packed up the camp without exchanging glances, each lost in their own thoughts. The footprints on the trail seemed deeper, as if carrying the weight of fear. The way back was done in silence, and when they finally left the forest behind, they felt a relief mixed with the certainty that something had been left unfinished. Leonard never returned to the Great Smoky Mountains. The trail of footprints, the shadows that seemed to move on their own, all of it accompanied him for years. Whenever he met with his friends, the subject was avoided, as if talking about it could bring back whatever was in that clearing. Time passed, but the impact of that night never disappeared. Leonard, once skeptical, came to respect the inexplicable. He didn't become a believer in legends, but he learned that there are things in nature that defy all logic. The absolute silence of the mountain, the dragging sound in the vegetation, the shared fear, all of it was etched in his memory. His friends went their separate ways, but all carried the mark of what they had experienced. The group, once united by the search for adventure, was now bound by a dark secret, a silent pact never to speak of what happened that night. Sometimes Leonard would close his eyes and see the shadows moving, feel the cold of the night, and hear the dragging sound echoing in his mind. The fear was no longer of something concrete, but of the unknown, of what cannot be seen or explained. The forest, with its vastness and silence, became a symbol of the mystery that inhabits the world. The experience changed Leonard forever. Skepticism gave way to humility in the face of the inexplicable, an acceptance that not everything can be understood or controlled. The silence of the mountain was now a constant reminder that the unknown is always lurking. Leonard's account is a warning to all who venture into wild places. Respect the silence, pay attention to the signs, and never underestimate the power of the unknown. Sometimes the real danger is not what you see, but what you feel. The weight of an invisible gaze, the sound that doesn't fit, the fear that paralyzes. The Great Smoky Mountains forest remains, imposing and mysterious, guarding its secrets. And Leonard, even from afar, knows that there are things that can never be explained. If you ever find yourself alone in an isolated clearing, remember Leonard's story. Silence can be more threatening than any noise, and shadows can hide more than simple animals. Respect for the unknown is the best shield against what cannot be seen. Leonard's experience serves as a reminder that nature is beautiful but also unforgiving. Fear, when ignored, can turn into something much larger, a nightmare that stays with you forever. Today, Leonard lives far from the mountains, but the past never left him. The silence of the forest, the dragging sound, the fear shared with his friends, all of it is part of who he became. The adventure that was supposed to be just another one turned into a turning point, a milestone between before and after. Encounters with friends are rare, and the subject of that night remains buried, but everyone knows what happened there marked each of them deeply and indelibly. If you liked this account, remember, there are mysteries that will never be unraveled, and stories that only make sense to those who lived them. The silence of the mountain is one of them, a skeptic's nightmare that defies reason and remains alive in the memory of those who dared to face it. July 2023, Raphael, 27, decided to disconnect from the modern world and embark on a trail through the Appalachian Mountains with his girlfriend, Louisa, and friends Daniel, Amanda, and Lucas. The plan was simple: 5 days of hiking, camping under the stars, breathtaking landscapes, and zero worries about notifications or social media. The first 2 days were a celebration of friendship and nature. The clear sky, the intense green of the mountains, easy laughter around the campfire, everything conspired for a perfect experience. Raphael and Louisa were especially close, enjoying every moment together. The group seemed united, and even the small difficulties of the trail were cause for jokes and playful banter. But on the third night, something changed. It all started mundanely. A conversation, a look, a misplaced word. No one knows for sure what triggered the fight. In a matter of minutes, Raphael and Louisa were yelling at each other, consumed by an inexplicable rage. Daniel and Amanda tried to intervene, but it was as if an invisible force fueled the conflict. The atmosphere, previously light, became heavy, almost suffocating. Louisa left crying and went to sleep in Amanda's tent. Raphael was left alone, brooding over the argument, feeling strange, as if he wasn't himself. Night fell over the campsite, and the silence of the forest seemed even deeper. Around 3 in the morning, Raphael awoke to the sound of his tent zipper. Half asleep, he saw Louisa rushing in. But something was wrong. The way she moved was too fast, too tense, her eyes wide, her smile too wide to be natural. She threw herself on him, whispering apologies and declarations of desire with an urgency that didn't match Louisa's personality. Raphael tried to talk, but she immobilized him with absurd strength, pinning his wrists as if she had the strength of an adult man. He felt his body paralyze, his eyes open, seeing everything but unable to react. Her smile was unnatural, her eyes black as bottomless pits, and the smell, a mixture of wet earth and rotting flesh, filled the space. What happened next was a vivid nightmare. The creature, still with Louisa's face, began to simulate a sexual act, but it wasn't desire. It was something predatory, ritualistic, as if it were sucking his life energy. Raphael felt increasingly weak, while its breathing became animalistic, mixed with guttural sounds and hisses. Then, before his eyes, the face began to unravel. The jaw dislocated, the skin cracked, revealing a grayish face full of thin, vibrating teeth. Its eyes, now sunken and dull, stared at him as if observing prey. When Raphael thought he couldn't resist, the creature simply stopped. It stood up, still with that disfigured body, and left the tent in silence. At the same instant, Raphael regained control of his body and screamed, seized by panic. The scream woke the entire campsite. Louisa came running from the other tent, followed by Amanda and the others. Raphael was trembling, sweating, barely able to speak. It took minutes before he could explain what had happened. Louisa, in shock, swore she had never left her tent, and Amanda confirmed that they had both slept together all night. The group stayed awake until dawn, no one daring to close their eyes again. The terror was palpable, and the silence of the forest now seemed a constant threat. The next day, they tried to rationalize what had happened. Was it a hallucination, a lucid dream, the result of stress from the fight? But Raphael knew what he had experienced. The touch, the smell, the dread, everything was too real to be just imagination. He felt his body weak, as if something had truly drained his energy. The decision was unanimous: end the hike immediately. They took the shortest path to a support point where they asked for help and put an end to the adventure. What was supposed to be an experience of connecting with nature turned into a nightmare no one wanted to relive. In the following days, Raphael continued to feel drained, as if part of his vitality had been torn away that night. His friends tried to cheer him up, but the fear remained. He began researching Appalachian legends and discovered accounts of entities that take on familiar faces to trick and attack lonely travelers. The pattern was frighteningly similar to what he had experienced: causeless arguments, isolating a victim, an attack in the early morning. Raphael came to believe that the fight with Louisa was no accident. It was as if that entity had manipulated events so that he would be alone, vulnerable. The group, once united, became distant. Each dealt with the trauma in their own way. Louisa felt guilty, even knowing she had done nothing. Amanda and Daniel avoided talking about the subject, and Lucas delved into research on local folklore, trying to find explanations. Everyone carried the weight of what happened, but Raphael was the most affected. He developed an irrational fear of sleeping alone, avoided dark places, and had recurring nightmares of the creature's face. The feeling of being watched never completely left him. Over time, Raphael sought psychological and spiritual help. He spoke with folklore specialists, priests, and even local shamans. All agreed on one point: there are forces in the Appalachians that defy understanding, entities that feed on the fear and energy of the living. The advice was clear: never underestimate the unknown, and never isolate yourself in places where legends still breathe. The experience marked him deeply, but it also made him more attentive to the signs of the inexplicable. Raphael learned to respect nature and its mysteries, and never to ignore the instinct of self-preservation. Today, Raphael shares his story as a warning. The supernatural may be closer than we imagine, just waiting for an opening to manifest. If you ever find yourself alone in the mountains, remember, not every face is what it seems, and not every whisper in the night is just the wind.